Welcome into Other People's Shoes, the podcast where listeners get to step into the lives of others and see the world through their shoes. Your host, Neil Matthews, is a seasoned interviewer who has a natural talent for empathizing with his guests and drawing out their unique perspectives. Through a combination of storytelling and insightful questioning, Other People's Shoes explores the lives of a diverse range of guests, from everyday people to celebrities and thought leaders. With a warm and welcoming style, Neil creates a safe and supportive space for his guests to share their stories, while also challenging listeners to broaden their perspective and think more deeply about the world around them. So tune in to Other People's Shoes with Neil Matthews and get ready to step into other people's shoes.
Hey, come take a walk with me, not like you used to do. Do something different and put yourself in other people's shoes. Open up your mind and open up your eyes and change your direction, change your perspective.
Welcome in to Other People's Shoes. As you know, I am your host, Neil Matthews. Thank you so much for hitting play today. Boy, am I excited that you're here today. It is not every week, really. The last 2 weeks, we've been out in New Jersey. I didn't plan it that way. It just sort of happened that way. We're getting a second dose or a double dose of our friends from New Jersey, or Jersey, as some would say. I don't know, because I'm not from there. But let me tell you, today's guest, I'm going to ask for some extra special attention today, because what I think you're going to hear today is you're going to hear a heart, and you're going to hear a heart of a man that has gone through some horrific stuff. He's now ready to kind of unveil, unmask, and maybe get us further down the road, because again, after today, next week is season finale day, and I can't wait for that. But before we get to that, we got to introduce you to my new friend, Dr. Mark. Dr. Mark, how are you today?
I'm doing well, Neil. How are you doing?
It is kind of fun. We had a gal last week from New Jersey, and then here we are.
I heard that. I listened to that episode. Yes.
We just kind of hung around, right? We just got an Airbnb. We just got up in the Red Roof Inn. I don't even know if that's a thing out there, but here we are.
Sure. Yeah, it is.
All right, fair enough. I was just trying to think of a really remote hotel that I've probably never stayed at. I don't know why, but Red Roof jumped in my head. So there
Came
it is.
to your mind. Okay.
It did. Yeah, I don't know why. Psychologists would have to analyze that. I don't know. Mark, help us with this, because we love to lead off every show with this question, and that's this: what size shoes do you wear, sir?
I wear a size 9.
A size 9. And now, is there a style or brand you like more than another?
I was thinking about that because I know you ask it. And I really love Skechers. Anything that's really comfortable. How's that?
That's fine. I can't get around the Skechers thing. New Balance and Skechers apparently will never be sponsors of ours. We actually got letters that says, stop talking about our shoes so negatively.
Really?
No, I'm messing around. Wouldn't that be fun to get a cease and assist? Stop trashing us on your show. So far, that hasn't happened. I hope that one day comes. Somebody comes along and is a shoe sponsor and can help us out with some sponsorship. That'd be fun.
Absolutely.
Other people's shoes, custom shoes. That'd be fun. So, Mark, on to you. Now, we're in this series that we're wrapping up, as I mentioned, next week. So you're kind of the precursor to our wrap up. And then we're gonna jump into a new season in the fall, which I cannot wait for. And then we're even talking about January already. I mean, that's how far ahead we are on our show. So high five to the team behind me, which, as you can see, is so many people standing behind me currently. It's no one. For those that aren't on the video with us, it's no one. It's just me and you. I say that because I'm really excited of where the show's going. For you, when we talk about this unmasking, what does that invoke in you, and how does that maybe relate to you and your story?
Neil, I would say it was about a little bit over 8 years ago that I had reached out to my doctor, and I had asked her for refills on my prescriptions, and it became very clear to her very quickly that I was abusing the medications, and I had abused the medications for quite a few years. And so she was very clear and said, you need to go to rehab, not something that I wanted to hear. So it was March of 2015. I remember being so nervous and waiting for my wife to get home to talk to her about it. I told her, and she was so filled with grace and so loving, and just said, I'm so proud of you for doing this. I told Debbie, and then I knew that I needed to tell my daughter, who was in Florida at the time, and texted her, told her. Again, she was wonderful with it. It started a journey for me that I never dreamed of. I ended up in rehab about an hour or two away from my home in Pennsylvania, that as the medications guns were going out of my system. The memories of my childhood came back with a vengeance, came back really, really strongly. People were asking me in rehab to tell my story, and I couldn't do it. I didn't have the words, and I wasn't emotionally regulated to be able to do it. I was up and down and up and down and up and down. I remember one counselor asked me, could you talk about the sexual abuse with your dad? And I froze. I couldn't say anything. Therein lies the title of the book, Finding My Words. I needed to find my words. The first 3 chapters is just talking about rehab and struggling through all of these memories coming up and me trying to push them down. The next 3 chapters, the middle of the book, is talking about the traumatic childhood that I had. It's finding my words and then speaking my words and then embracing my words. Hard chapters in chapters 4, 5, and 6. Crazy story. My dad was a multimillionaire, grew up in the Depression era. He had tons and tons of money, was very, very respected in the community. I was about 4 years old, and my dad was forcing me to eat carrots. We were at the dinner table. He's forcing me to eat carrots. I didn't want to eat the carrots, so I ended up vomiting. And he became irate and picked me up and threw me in the garbage and said, stay there, you're a piece of garbage. That's where you belong. All of these memories are coming back. During rehab, a lot of painful things came up. The sexual abuse. The sexual abuse started at around 4 years of age and lasted until I was about 7. And interestingly enough, it stopped because my family experienced armed robbery where 4 men came in with guns. 2 of them stayed upstairs with us and 2 of them were downstairs in the basement with my mom and dad, where the coins and money and things like that were. We never woke up. Certainly wreaked havoc on our home. It was just so problematic. After that, my mom became an alcoholic, just would sit and drink beer and become intoxicated. And then my dad became very, very paranoid, Neil. He was obsessed with catching them. Some of the really strange behaviors that he had that was really hard growing up with. When I was about 7, 8 years old, he broke a hole in the wall in the basement and gave my sister and I forks and knives and spoons and had us dig out a room. Really, really bizarre things. And so I'm sitting in rehab and all of these memories are coming up that I tried to really push down with the medication that really numb myself to. So strange, as I mentioned, he was a self-made millionaire. And so he would, because he came from the Depression era, was very, very obsessed with money. He would take $100 bills and he would put them in the sink with detergent and then wash them and then lay them out on an ironing board and then iron them and them in stacks of 1,000 until he had $100,000 stacked in a box. And he hid that in a piece of furniture in the living room. There's a lot more stories in the book. It was just so hard growing up with all of these bizarre things. And I knew them. The sexual abuse, I had repressed that. I didn't remember that at all. It came back with a vengeance when the medication came out of my system. Not only was I dealing with the withdrawal and the symptoms of the withdrawal from the medications physically, I was also dealing with a lot of emotional pain and a lot of emotional dysregulation.
That's a tough road to walk down, I would imagine, as a child.
Absolutely.
And then, now as an adult. A couple of things come to mind for me as I hear that. Why do you think it stopped at 7?
I've thought about that a lot. Part of the recovery process for me has been learning my story and trying to figure out exactly, that's a great question, like why certain things happened or why certain things stopped at a certain point. I think what happened, Neil, was my dad became really, really obsessed with catching the men that had entered our home with the robbery. And so the attention was taken off of me and his focus was on something else.
Your dad almost sounds like, and again, I don't know this guy really well, but he almost sounds a little bit like Howard Hughes. That guy was pretty eccentric in some respects.
Yeah, he was a pillar in the community and very, very successful. So in that way, it was very strange compared to the things that were going on at home.
Again, it stops at 7. And I mean, it would make sense that his focus would then go to, especially if he was obsessed with somebody coming in. I mean, that's a robbery already is one thing, getting burglarized or having your car broken into or things stolen from you. I mean, that is definitely one thing for sure. But the thing for me that I'm wondering about is he never went after your sister. He never maybe went after another boy in the neighborhood or anything like that,
I don't
to
know.
your knowledge?
I don't know. Yeah. And one of the things I talk about in the book that I wanted to be really fair is I had a brother, an older brother, and an older sister. And I make the point in the book that I was not going to talk about their stories. Their stories are their stories. And so I wanted to showcase my story and just talk about recovery from trauma, recovery from addiction, recovery from trauma, recovery from a lot of mental health issues with anxiety and depression and issues of anger and flashbacks, and just talk about that and focus in on my story rather than their stories.
You being a parent, how did that life growing up and the way your dad treated you and the way things were going on, how did that affect you as a parent?
Over the last 8 years have really examined closely, and I've been in a lot of counseling and I've been in a lot of men's groups and just like wondering how different things impacted. And for that, I think that in the early years, I was really attentive to my daughter. I have a daughter. Her name is Emily. I was very attentive. As I took more and more medication, I withdrew from the relationship more. We had to rebuild our relationship. I had to look at where I came from and then where I was and then where I was going. And the great part of my story is that it has a really happy ending as far as my relationship with my daughter is wonderful. We just got back. We were out in Wyoming for 2 weeks with her and her husband, Brandon. Just say that I have a great relationship with her, been able to talk with her and talk through a lot of it. Also with my wife, Debbie, we've had to do a lot of work in our marriage because addiction takes a toll on marriages and things have worked out really well for us. And I know that that's not always the case, but I've had to really examine the values that I grew up with and then the values that I had and then the values that I wanted to hold. What was important to me? Stopped going to church for a long time in the middle of my addiction and then returned back to church and have gotten very involved with that. And I'm really happy with that. The idea of the book was just how I went from being so traumatized, so emotionally dysregulated and so addicted to moving away from that. It took a lot of hard work. It took a lot of counseling. Been in hours and hours and hours of counseling and still am in counseling to be able to enter into people's lives that I kind of vacated, unfortunately.
First off, I think counseling is amazing, and I think everyone should do it. I've been going to a counselor since middle of November, and for me, I'll tell you, it really has not only opened my eyes to how I was raised, the things that happened to me as a child, how I've processed them as a child and now as an adult. I think it really opened my eyes, and it sounds like it's done that for you as well, opened my eyes to the fact of, oh, this is why I do what I do when this happens. Oh, this makes sense now that I have this struggle here or that struggle there.
Exactly.
I think that's powerful.
My wife and I were in premarital counseling, and I think that really helped us with our marriage because even though there were a lot of turbulent years of me being disconnected from the marriage, it made it much easier, I think, when we came back together after rehab. We had that foundation that was really solid. We've been able to build on that, and that's been so helpful.
How is your relationship with your dad currently?
My dad passed away. That's what's interesting, Neil, is it was in July of 2014 he passed away, and then I entered rehab in March of 2015. So it was kind of like the coast was clear, that part of the brain that carries all the past with it, and that I could start working on some of these things. But it took time. When you've come from harm or when you've come from a lot of trauma, it takes time. It's not like a year of counseling and everything's fine. It takes a lot of time.
If you were able to have maybe a moment with your dad, maybe take him to the Jersey Shore or the boardwalk out there, and you got to spend maybe a weekend with him, what kind of things do you think you'd be able to talk about with him now that you've found some healing through counseling and things of that nature?
I would want to ask him gently what he went through when he was a kid. I'm sure that he had a host of traumatic events happening in his life that caused him to act and behave the way that he did. I think that one of the things that I needed to work toward is forgiveness for him. And that's been a long road. And it's not been like, okay, one and done. I've had this many sessions and now I've forgiven him. It's kind of been like a motion picture that it continues to happen. Things crop up or things that I think about, and then I have to revisit it and I have to bring forgiveness to it. Really important for me.
I'm guessing your dad was held in pretty high esteem by folks, I would imagine, from the status and kind of how he was around maybe the circles that he was in. Has anybody come back and questioned your account of what happened in any way?
There's been a couple of people that have said to me, I knew things were off, but I didn't know they were off to the degree that your book tells it. So there's been some people that have kind of affirmed that my dad had some rough edges or some difficult behaviors or peculiar behaviors. That has been reaffirming to me. There's nobody that's come back and said like, oh, I can't believe it.
Well, I mean, I guess that's always the hesitation, I would imagine. I have two cousins that walk through sexual abuse with with their dad, and they actually were past guests. And one of the things that I know the oldest cousin struggled with, my cousin Brandy, she struggled with for years. And even now, still, I would imagine on some level, where she feels like nobody believed her. Nobody believed her from the standpoint of that your dad didn't really do that to you. Your dad really wasn't that neglectful to you. And so that's why I was wondering on that question, is anyone come around you in that respect to say, no, there's no way your dad could have done that. He was this or he was that. That's why I was wondering about that.
That's a great question. Nobody has until now, at least. We'll see what happens going forward. People have read the book. They have been really empathetic and have talked about just how hard it must have been to write. And it was hard to write it. It was hard to go through those memories and to kind of relive them in a different way by writing them down for a different context.
I think that's what stops people from coming out of that shadow or taking off the mask or whatever analogy you want to use there, is the idea that, is anyone going to believe my story? Is anyone going to believe my account of what happened? And I think that does... From what I hear, I don't have that story. That isn't part of my background. Would say, and I would imagine just from the folks that I've talked to who have shared, like, I was afraid no one was going to believe me. I was really genuinely afraid no one was going to believe me. And then what? And then I'm a liar. And I was like, yeah, that's a tough thing to think about. And so I just wondered if that entered into your head at all when you were in that process or no.
The thing is that I needed to tell it to myself. And that might sound odd. There was a part of me that just didn't want to believe that happened to me. Part of the counseling was just being able to affirm that these were experiences that I went through. It confirms why I had so many issues with depression and with anxiety and with anger and flashbacks. And, one of the things I talk about, Neil, in the book is that, I didn't want to end the book like, yep, went to rehab, went to counseling, and now everything is just wonderful, everything. I still struggle. I still struggle with issues of depression and anxiety and codependency, and I still struggle with flashbacks, and some days are worse than others. I had a lot of victories in those areas. I didn't want to end the book like, yep, everything's fine now, because I know that that's not the reality for people. I work with people now. I have the privilege of working with people that have had severe abuse or trauma or addictions. And it's not like, you get some treatment and everything's fine. It's an ongoing process. It's not a procedure.
Well, and I respect that. I think what you're saying, nails it on the head completely. The idea that you've now taken the pain, taken the heartache, taken the crap, if you will, even the junk in your life, and really tried to take and make that into something where you're actually helping people. And to me, I think there's no greater gift in the world to be able to do that for folks, for sure.
It redeems it. It gives meaning to it, and it gives you purpose in your life that you can come alongside others and help them in the same way that you've been helped.
That is empathy in the essence of what it is now I know you've gone through that pain, you've experienced that. Wow, I'm not alone in that. Oh my gosh, like, let's be best friends now, maybe.
I think there's something magical, if I can use that word, about people getting together and saying, yeah, I know what that was like, or I know what this was like, or somebody saying, yeah, I experienced that too. It's really scary for me to talk about this, but I'm going to talk about it with you. Being able to be received by another person who doesn't leave the room, so to speak, but stays in the room and moves forward and nods their head. They understand where you're coming from. It's a powerful interaction.
Well, and again, that's going back to counseling. I think that's what counseling has done for me, is it's really helped me understand, again, where I've come from. But when my counselor says to me, Neil, I know how you feel. I've gone through that too. I have experienced that too. What your parents did to you, I have a very similar story. And then he shares his kind of similar story to that. And again, like I was saying, I just think there's so much beauty in that. There's so much power in that. There's so much freedom in that. There's so much restoration, big word there, in that. Again, all of it can be redeemed. Now, listen, I'm sure Hallmark isn't beating down your door happily ever after a story. I get that. And life isn't like that, sadly. I mean, it would be amazing if it was, but it's not. When you talk about going into rehab, getting the drugs out of your system, have you ever let yourself think about, if that doesn't take place, am I able to walk through the abuse and all this stuff that now I've uncovered?
Yeah, I could have never walked through it without the help of others. As I said earlier, just the flood of memories that came as the medications went out of my system, it was clear to me the medications served a purpose. They didn't work, but they served a purpose in blocking the memories. Dr. Gabor Mate talks about, don't ask why the addiction, ask why the pain. Being able to look at the underneath and look at the insanity of addictions, but also look at the genius of addictions, that it helps you to cope with things that you weren't able to cope with. with, possibly earlier in your life.
The idea of going back in time. I'm a huge Back to the Future fan. Guys at my work watch the movie constantly, all three of them, just kind of on a loop. They have specific days, by the way, where they watch different movies. And so there's actually a day where they watch all three Back to the Futures once a week. I'm always mindful of that movie kind of going on. And maybe that's where this question kind of has blossomed from. But if you could somehow take your age now, travel back in time in that proverbial DeLorean to 7 years old you, or maybe even 5 years old you, in the midst of the abuse, in the midst of everything that's going on with your dad, what would you tell that younger you?
It's pretty impressive how well you've done. That's what I would say. It's really impressive how you've been able to cope. I think I have done that in a lot of ways, Neil. Counseling has done that, kind of like drawing two circles on the floor and putting my right foot in one and my left foot in the other, having my right foot in the present at my age, and then having the other go back to that 7-year-old and what he went through, or that 4-year-old that was thrown in the garbage. While there was a lot of damage, there's been so much restoration. I'm proud of that 4-year-old. And I'm proud of that 7-year-old, proud of the younger parts of myself, if you put it that way, that have been able to cope. And I have a lot of determination to heal. And I have put myself through hours and hours and hours of counseling. And it has been well worth it for me to be able to be present in my life today. Really, really thankful for the counselors that I've had that have guided me through this process and helped me to learn my story. It's a really hard story that my dad had a brother who was cognitively impaired. And in that time, he was referred to as mentally retarded. And my dad referred to me and compared me to him a lot in my childhood. Just looking at how that affects a kid. I went on long before rehab, got my bachelor's, and then I got a master's, and then I got a second master's, and then I got my doctorate. And I think all of that was really good and being used for good. Underneath all of that was me trying to prove that I was intelligent, that I wasn't cognitively impaired in some way.
There are so many times when we have a traumatic childhood, we begin, I think of it as we're chasing a ghost.
Absolutely. And that word trauma, if you translate it, it's a Greek word. It is translated in English as wound, that we've been wounded. And for me, it was one thing after another. So I was diagnosed with complex trauma, which is just one thing after another, after another, after another.
I applaud your efforts to not only try to get yourself healthy and whole, we're willing to not only share it with your beloved, but you even went as far as sharing it with your daughter, and that they were there to support you and really kind of pour into you in your lowest moments. There are many men that I've met through the years that wouldn't have the bravery that you had. Hold it in. They would continue to live in the shadow or put the mask on, or my favorite Matthew West song, I'm fine, you're fine, we're all fine. It's okay.
Everybody's good.
Okay. Yeah, like what's your problem?
Yeah.
I don't understand why you're freaking out. I'm fine. Even though you're inside dying every single day, to me,
Absolutely.
I applaud that from a human to human. I applaud that effort on that. What would be your greatest takeaway from childhood? Is there anything that was, you look back on? I mean, it sounds like it was very horrific, but is there anything you look back on and go, man, that was a good moment. I can kind of smile at that moment, like this got to happen and that was kind of cool.
As I've learned my story, there was so much tension in my home, and I have no doubt that it was because my dad was so traumatized early on in his life. So there's not a lot of light moments in my childhood. I think that my faith is really important to me, and it has made me very determined to continue to press on. I think coming out of my childhood has made me a very determined individual and a resilient person. I think that I'm really, really happy, not for all the pain and all of those things, what has come out of it. I'm really, really grateful for that.
Well, and again, I think that's the best part, is the idea, again, no matter what has happened to you, you've continued to thrive. You've continued to find ways to succeed. To me, I applaud your efforts in that. I mean, a double master's, not a lot of folks have that. I'm thinking just hanging on their wall.
Thank you.
So Mark, help me with this. If somebody's listening right now and they're hearing your story and they're like, you know what? I know Mark's story because Mark's story is very similar to mine. I know Mark's pain because Mark's pain is very similar to my pain. They're like, I don't have the courage yet like he does. How would you encourage someone to maybe take off that mask and come free of that past in their life?
I would say that I was that person. Went to rehab and started just talking about everything, and everything was an open book. Took time for the mask to come off. Still have to work on it. I would say that if there's somebody there that is thinking, I don't want to continue to live the way that I'm living, or if they have unwanted behaviors or things like that, or addictions, I would say even if they could find one person to start talking to confide in, one safe person that's going to keep things confidential, have had had. And I have been really, really fortunate. And I consider myself fortunate to have a lot of people that I have been able to share this. And now sharing it in the book and sharing it on podcasts, speaking different places. I think it was really important for me to be able to share with one person. And I remember I talked about this in the book in chapter 3. Talk about a friend of mine. His name is Brennan. And that's the name that I use in the book, his actual name. And he was so instrumental. He was somebody that didn't leave the room, that leaned forward and listened. And he said to me, you know what, if you're not feeling comfortable right now talking about this, that's fine. Just make sure when you get out of here that you find somebody to talk to. And that's what I've done, one person after another. And it started really with being able to confide in him with just some of the craziness in my childhood. So I would say if somebody could just find like one person to confide in, or the other thing is go to a 12-step meeting, and you don't have to talk, just listen to stories. That's what I did. Is I sat for a couple of years in 12-step meetings. I didn't talk, but I listened to stories. And even in that, it was very healing for me, Neil.
Well, yeah, again, I think there's power in sharing. I think there's so much power in sharing. And I think those that don't share, I do struggle with that. I struggle with how long are you going to continue to allow that pain to be your world? That's a powerful encouragement for folks. Obviously, you've mentioned the book a number of times. We've kind of hovered around it, I'll say, as if it was a helicopter kind of touring around. If somebody's wondering right now how they can get their hands on the book, where they can go to purchase it, where's the best place, and how can folks do that?
Yeah, they can log on to Amazon and just put Dr. Mark McNear, Finding My Words, A Ruthless Commitment to Healing Gently After Trauma.
And that's the best place, right?
Absolutely.
Now, Mark, you mentioned you are a little older than I am. I think so. I'm 43. You don't have to necessarily say how old you are, but I'm 43. And
they can do the math. I went into rehab when I was 55.
Well, there we go. We'll have them do some math today on that as well. We had a teacher last week, so she wasn't a math teacher. I want to do this for you too. We're going to do a really cool thing. You forgot one place that is going to be also, but that's okay because again, you're a little older. It's fine. We are going to have it on our website, opspodcast.com/books that I love. So folks can check it out there. If they don't want to search Amazon, we're going to link it right back to Amazon and just kind of put it up towards the tippy top, not the very top, towards the top of our book list that we have that's ever growing. It seems like we want to honor you in that respect to really highlight your book on our site. So hope you're okay with that.
Absolutely.
Mark, I just want to say thank you. Thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate your bravery. Like I said, it really means a lot to me that you shared what you shared today. I want to go back to this, though, one thing before we get out of here, and that's this. How was your faith affected during those years of not only trauma, but maybe even during those years of substance abuse and then now? How has that evolution kind of gone on?
I think that I really questioned because I wasn't living according to my values. I really questioned whether God loved me. I kind of felt like he tolerated me at best, and I think that I felt so inferior and felt that worked for everybody else. That love worked for everybody else. For me, it didn't work. And I've come to realize and I've come to really experience God's love in such deeper ways. Talk about in the introduction that he showed up in my mess with love and kindness and grace and mercy. There's a Bible verse. It's one of my life verses now. It's in Romans chapter 2 and verse 4. It is the kindness of God that leads to change, or it's the kindness of God that leads to repentance. I've really been able to grasp much more, that idea that in Jeremiah where he talks about, I love you with an everlasting love. It wasn't me pursuing him in the middle of my addiction. It was him pursuing me and providing love and grace and mercy and kindness to me.
There are those out there, skeptics, that would push on that and say, if he's such a loving and amazing God and showed up in your mess, why didn't he just pull you out of it? Why didn't he just stop your dad? Or why didn't he strike your dad down? I mean, he's God after all. He has the power to do whatever he wants. What would be your response to that?
Me trying to question God is like an ant on the ground crawling around questioning me. It's a matter of perspective. He's all-knowing. He has his reasons for doing things. And in Isaiah, that his ways are not our ways, his thoughts are not ours. I don't really grasp God, just a tiny, tiny bit of him because of me being in human form. There's been times, Neil, where I've questioned that and said, where was he? And I really believe that he was there the whole time, grieving and sad. As you know, he allows things to happen in this world. We live with free will. We're not robots that he controls. All I can say is that this is a story that I can say definitively, beauty from ashes. My life was going nowhere, and he has resurrected corrected it and really restored so much of the damage that was caused.
I wonder about that 4, 5, 6, 7-year-old you, all those ages in between there. And I wonder if that 4, 5, 6, 7-year-old you would recognize the you that sits before me right now.
Good question. I don't know.
I wonder about that even in myself so many times. Would my 6-year-old me recognize 43-year-old me? You know, I don't know. I want to reiterate the fact that your willingness to share is the power in that. It's not necessarily Mark's power. I believe it's God's power through you. Would you echo that or no?
Absolutely. No doubt.
All right. Well, Mark, as we wrap up, again, just final thought goes to you, and then we're going to do some silliness because I felt like we've had some very serious stuff. We need a little levity. So,
you know, I've been asked that a lot recently, and one of the things I have talked about is just the power of gratitude. It is so easy, Neil, for us to look at what we don't have. I found tremendous power in being able to look at what I do have and to make lists of all the blessings that I have and focus on that as opposed to the negativity that so often creeps into our minds.
So a list of gratitude.
Yeah, the things that we have, because it's so easy for us to look at what we don't have. It's just human nature for us to look at the negative. And we have like 60, 70,000 thoughts a day or something, you know, and a lot of those are really negative. So it's one way, a lot of times I like to start the day off and just make a list of things that I'm really thankful for. You know, sometimes I'll talk about just being thankful for the day that the doctor confronted me and being thankful for going to rehab and being thankful for Debbie's reaction and being thankful for Emily's reaction and just the story that has come out of all of that harm.
There's something to be said about, again, taking a moment to really recognize where you've come from and how far you've traveled. Well, Mark, thanks for that. Well, let's do some silliness. This is our silliness that we do at the end of the show. It's called Senseless, and these 6 random questions that I'm going to ask you. Don't worry, you don't have to answer all 6. You can just answer just one. So we're going to roll for you. I even brought my handy dandy North Carolina cup. I know you're a big Tar Heels fan out there in New Jersey, aren't you?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I could tell. You even wore light blue to me
yes,
today.
I did.
Because you knew. Yeah, you knew. See, he knew.
People can't see it, but we're matching today.
We are matching today. I have a collared shirt on. You sort of have a collared shirt on too.
Yeah.
No tie, by the way, so we don't do ties here. All right, so let's roll for you. There's my rolling cup thing. And you got a number 6, which is that. It's even a light blue 6. Did you notice that, Mark?
I did notice it.
Yeah, a lot of light blue in the world around me. Now, this is a fun one. If you are stranded on a deserted island and you can only bring 3 things, only 3 things, what would you bring?
I would bring my wife, I would bring my Bible, and I would bring my cell phone.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Neil. It's been a pleasure.
All right, guys and gals, kids and campers alike, one more episode down, one more to go till our season finale day. It's going to be great. I know I've been talking about it for a while now. You guys got to hang around next week. It's going to be good. But there's something Mark said that really is still kind of troubling me, and maybe it's troubling you. So here's my challenge for you. Do you remember years ago, the movie, Leonardo DiCaprio starred in it, believe it or not, and it's called Man in the Iron Mask. By the way, that is the very first movie in the theater movie I took my wife to see. In that movie, he was locked in this mask. He was trapped inside a dungeon, put away, thrown away, and all of a sudden, the Musketeers come and find him, and they save him. And they put him in his proper spot, which was on the throne. So I'm wondering about you. How can you be a 3 Musketeer this week? Who can you help free from their iron mask of shame? But guys, I want to say thank you so much for listening. I want to say this, of course, don't forget, remember, when you walk in other people's shoes, you really do get a different perspective on life. Thank you so much for listening, and stay tuned till next week when we walk in other people's shoes.